Hi everyone and welcome back to Activity 26. Today we are going to continue talking about parabolas. So a couple of things to remember about our parabolas and the directions. Reminder that the value that is being squared is going to dictate for us if we are opening up or down or left or right. So remember x squared, you are going to open up or down, all dependent upon if you have a positive or a negative. 1 over 4d value. Y squared is the left and the right versions. How are our focus and our directrix related then? These are both going to be d units away from the vertex. So think about the vertex kind of like the midpoint between them, between those both of the line and the point, the directrix and the focus. When we use the d value in the equation of a parabola, well, one way that can help us is if we know the vertex, that's going to help us plot the directrix and the focus because they are both going to be the same amount away, d units from that vertex. Now, what happens though if they don't give us our equation in the best factored form? So we have to, first of all, kind of put our completing the square skills to the test by moving our squared term only and its like variable to one side. The other variable then, the non-squared, and any constants, the numbers all move to the other side. And then from there, we are going to factor out any numbers in front of the squared term, if there is one. And then from there, we are going to complete the square for the squared variable, right, for that side. Be sure to add the constant that you get to both sides and divide over the 1 over 4d value if needed to finish it out. So we see here a couple of examples of our non-standard form equations, and we want to make sure we start by converting these back. So again, any of our non-squared terms we want on one side, we want the squared terms on the other. So I'm going to leave the 4y and the negative 8 on one side. I'm going to add over the x squared and the 4x to the other side. I just like my x squared value to be the positive 1 so that we can make sure that we can actually complete the square on that. Now, from there, again, we're going to end up completing the square, so we know we end up adding to both sides our c value. So 4 divided by 2 is 2, and then when we square that, we end up adding 4 to both sides. So we have x plus 2 when we factor on the right. On this left-hand side, then, we have negative 8 plus 4, which is negative 4. And then what we're going to notice over here is we can divide out this 4 so that we just have our y by itself. And then to finally put that 1 over 4d value in front of our square term, we would have y minus 1 and then 1/4 out front here. Our next example, this time we have a y value that is squared. So we're going to leave the y value on the left-hand side this time, and then we'll just move over to the right-hand side, the x, and then the 34 by subtracting the x, subtracting the 34. Now, in order to complete the square, reminder, we need this to be a 1y squared. So we're going to divide out that GCF of 8 from both pieces. So we have y squared minus 4y, and then a blank. And then on the other side, we know we will have to add to that side as well. So negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Squared, though, is 4. Now, we have to be very careful on this particular one because when we have a GCF factored out, officially we have to take into consideration that if we distributed that through, 8 times 4 is really 32 that we're adding to both sides. So make sure you multiply that GCF by that value you're adding because really that space is accounting for 32. So on the left-hand side, when we factor, we would have 8 on the outside still, y minus 2 quantity squared. On the right-hand side, negative 34, but plus 32 is negative 2. And then we could take out a negative 1 so that we have that as a positive x. And if we divide that negative 1 over, we actually then would finally have negative 8, y minus 2 quantity squared. Again, we like usually to have that 1 over 4d value in front of our squared term. All right, now we have 2 more on this side. So again, be careful on these examples. Make sure that you factor out that 2 before you get started on this first one. And then on the second one, make sure you move everything over as well. I would actually advise on this one maybe adding over the x squared and subtracting the 4x so that you have that nice positive on that side. Now, sometimes what we end up doing is completing the square to get our parabolas into the normal standard form so that we can actually find some of these other features like we did in the previous lesson. So in this particular problem, if we move everything, I'm going to kind of flip everything around because I like to get this x squared positive. I could do that by if I add this all to the left-hand side. So I'm adding over the x squared, subtracting the 10x. And then I can move that y over through subtraction so that it is isolated by itself. And then we know we end up needing to complete the square on this. So we'll end up adding a blank and then the negative y minus 22 also gets that blank. So negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. Squared is 25. So on the left-hand side, we have x minus 5 quantity squared after we factor. Negative 22 plus 25 is 3. And then if we factor out this negative 1, we are actually left with, if we divide it over, a negative out front, negative 1, in front of our squared value, and then that equals the y minus 3. So what we are going to notice this time is that our vertex, our h comma k, is at 5 comma 3. So that would be a point right here. And then because our x value is squared and we have a negative d value, this is going to force us to have a downward facing graph. Now this time negative 1 is our 1 over 4d value. So as we cross multiply and solve, we have negative 4d equals 1. So d is negative 1/4 or negative 0.25. And again, really that 0.25 negative is basically again telling us that this is opening downward towards our focus. And then our directrix this time would be a horizontal line, 0.25 above our vertex. So that directrix again is a horizontal line, 0.25 above 5 comma 3.5 or 3. So at 3.25 it's passing through. Focus is still 5 units to the right, but down 0.25 at 2.75. Last but not least, our axis of symmetry. This time we would be folding over a vertical line. this time through x equals 5 for that parabola. Now, in the next example, if we kick the negative 17 over by adding to both sides, again, what we actually notice is that we have negative y squared minus 10y. And again, we need this to be a positive 1y squared in order to be able to complete the square. So again, you might want to rewrite this with everything rewritten with a flip-flopped sign, because if we multiply everything by a negative 1, then everything would be a positive, or a flip sign, so we have that positive y squared value. And again, we end up adding on to both sides. In this case, 10 divided by 2 squared. So 25 gets added to both sides. So on the left-hand side, we would have negative 8x, negative 17 plus 25 is positive 8. On the right-hand side, after we factor, we would end up with y plus 5 quantity squared. Over here, if we factor out that negative 8, we are actually going to be left with x minus 1 on the inside. And then last but not least, we like that 1 over 4d value in front of our squared variable. So in this case, the negative 1/8 can come in front of y plus 5 quantity squared. So this time our vertex is at 1, negative 5, and we notice that negative and y squared value means we are opening to the left. So we plot our vertex. This time our 1 over 4d was negative 1 over 8, which means if we cross multiply and solve, we end up with 4d equals 8, aka our d value this time is 2. So our focus is going to come 2 units to the left, so we open towards that, have our correct opening orientation. And then our directrix this time is going to be a vertical line 2 units to the right of our parabola. So that directrix is a vertical line through x equals 3. Our focus is a point to the left 2 units at negative 1, negative 5. Axis of symmetry this time, we have this horizontal line that we could fold over. That's happening through y equals negative 5. One last example for you to try. Thanks everyone for watching.